You stare off into space, you get distracted, things like that. Hey, Jaquel, Tyler, come on, into the center, please. All right. So let's look at the questions that you guys had. So how do we average? What are we doing today? We'll get to what we're doing today, but I'm going to start here and just kind of move around the room to answer these questions. So how do we average numbers? That's actually going to play a part of hopefully what we end with today or first thing Monday. So how do we average something?
You got to add all the numbers up and divide it by like the amount. People.
So sum of values divided by the number of objects. And so this is actually going to matter, just as an example. By the way, have I shown y'all this symbol yet?
Yes.
Okay, so what is this? It is, the name is X bar, but what does it stand for?
A mean.
It is a mean, but which mean? Sample mean. And that's important because you can have a sample mean and you can have a population mean. And so usually we don't have the population mean, but we're going to use the sample mean to estimate it, right? Because what's the whole point of a sample survey? To make an inference about the population, right? So use that sample to make an inference about the population. So there we go. We got sample mean. Sum of values divided by number of objects. So just as an example, let's say I look at these first 4 words here, and I want to know the average word length. Well, when I want to know the average word length, I want to know how many letters per word. So how many words, or how many letters do we have?
Letters?
Yeah, how many letters?
14. 14.
Right? So if I just added them, right, it'd be 5 plus 5 plus 2 plus 2. That's the sum of the values, 14, divided by how many objects were there? 4. So that's my average. And so you can leave it as a fraction, or you can actually write it out. Is that, we good on how we average? Okay? Jaquel, can you scoot to the side so I can see the question right there? And Demaya, you as well. Thank you. Okay, so does the rules vary by scenario? And so that was a question that Kalia was asking. And so that was the question that Kalia was asking. And so if we're talking about the rules, right? If you understand, or if you know the definitions by heart, and you understand the definitions, the answer is no. The characteristic of interest is always the information that we are interested in. It is what we are interested in. The population is always the large group, it's everything that we want to make an inference about. And the sample is always the small group we get our data from. And so if you understand those ideas completely, then no, it doesn't change. Okay? I always try to give you big ideas that will always work. So if you go back to those definitions, what the thing is, that's it. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yep.
We good? Does that help, Kalia? Like, we'll practice with some as well. But keep that in mind. The definitions define a whole lot. This summer I actually did a research project as a part of my degree that I finished up that literally looked at what if we approached learning mathematics through the lens of language. And so there's a lot of research that shows if we study and focus on the vocabulary and really understand what the vocabulary means, then it helps us learn long term. And a huge part of language, it's called language acquisition, really understanding the words, is experiencing it. So like my son is almost 2 years old, and right now he is picking up words left, right. And I'm not telling him definitions of those words, but by him talking with us, by us discussing, by us interacting, he's picking up the meaning of things. That's why I ask you all to work at these vertical surfaces, and I ask you to interact and experience this stuff, because when you do that, you actually naturally pick these ideas up, and I can see and hear what you're thinking about, and I can provide you support. So keep that in mind. The vocabulary is huge for these ideas. Observational study. Did we actively talk about observational study yesterday, or is that something we left off on?
I think we left off on.
Okay. So, I remember we identified the population, the sample and the characteristic of interest for the daycare centers, didn't we? That's where we left? That was the last thing we did? Okay, so I'm going to hold off on that question because one of the first things we do today will answer that. When are we going to have a practice test on this unit? We're going to have our first demonstrate your understanding today. And so I'm going to explain more what a demonstrate your understanding is later. It's not a practice test, and it's not really a quiz, but it's kind of like a quiz, and I'll explain why. What is a confounding? We will get to that later today, so don't sweat that yet. What's going to be the hardest thing we do in this class? Here's the thing. Something that's hard for one person isn't necessarily hard for another person. So I'm not going to put that burden on you. You figure out what's difficult for you, and I'm going to be there to support you. The rest of the class is going to be there to support you. What studies to define? Can someone clarify what you're saying with that? I'm just not sure what this is asking.
I ain't had no time to write it, but I meant to say what is the hardest studies to define? My fault.
Not really. As long as you understand the definitions, none of them. But we're gonna get into that later. So, are the rules different for other problems? We already addressed that, or at least for this group, did I address that enough, Tyler? Did we address this enough, or do I need to clarify? Okay, moving on. Will we be working out of the book more? We're going to have a good mixture, at least in my opinion, a good mixture of exploring a concept outside the book and then getting some practice within the book. Okay, so we're going to have a balance there because that book can be a great resource. Difference between categorical and quantitative. All right, so as a reminder, so I'm going to erase some of this since I covered this. We're going to start with quantitative, and I'll explain why in a second. Quantitative. What is the defining characteristic or detail for quantitative data? What do we have? Oh guys, we gotta know this.
That can be measured or counted.
Say it again.
Something can be measured or counted.
There's another word I want you to add in at the beginning of that.
No?
Number, right? So it's a number that results from what two things?
Measurement.
Measuring or what?
Example.
Counting, right? So it is I should say a number response, okay? And so it's important to say it's a number response that results from measuring or counting, because can we have numbers in categorical data?
Yeah.
Yes, very much so. And so remember, you have the Frere model, the notes, and the practice with answers already, but categorical, this is a response that what?
It's in a category.
And so that's the big thing we want to think about. So if I were to ask, so just give a couple examples, if I were to go around and find out how many times each of you have gotten on your phone today, would that be categorical or quantitative?
Quantitative?
Yeah.
So Taj, let me ask you this. You may not know, but just give me an estimate. How many times have you been on your phone today?
Like 5?
Oh, about 5 times?
Yeah, my phone's 100%.
I mean, I hear you, but I want you to think about the response you just gave me. Is that response a number that results from measuring or counting, or did that response fit you into a category?
Into a category.
So it's quantitative. But not cool. You really can't know how long you've been on your phone.
How many times have you been on your phone today?
5.
5 times, and he can what?
He counted it.
Oh, he counted how many times he got onto his phone, right?
Just quantitative.
So it's a number from counting, so it is quantitative.
Quantitative.
You got to think about how the responses work, right? Now, if I change the question, I just say, how many, or have you been on your phone today? Right? Taj, have you been on your phone today? The answer is yes. So does that fit you into a category, or is that a number resulting from measuring or counting?
Category.
That's a category, right? If I were to ask, Mel, what zip code do you live in?
35456.
35456. Is that a response? Is that a number that results from measuring or counting, or is that fitting into a category?
You didn't have to count it, you can just say it.
Notice.
Huh?
3, 5, 4.
Regardless, hey,
3, 5, 4,
right here,
1.
right here. Category. Even though it's a number, is it quantitative? No, it is a category. Okay. Does that help? For those who asked, and even those who didn't ask, we got to make sure we understand this. What strategy can we use for asking survey questions? Does anyone remember a key word that goes into asking a survey question? You, right? So remember yesterday we looked at that idea of how much time do teens spend online each day? So let's simply make it, how long did you spend online today? Yes, it would also be quantitative, but notice the survey question is just something that you are directly asking somebody. How often will we use sample problems? We will always have some sample problems. How often will we what? Do homework? Bookwork, okay. I mean, sometimes it's out of the book, sometimes it's not. It depends on what's best for your learning. A quick note I will make is this. I will point out not a single person has asked a specific question from the check your understanding. I need you to remember, I don't assign traditional homework. Those Frere models that have practice problems on them, those are your check your understanding. Some of these questions could have been directly addressed by you doing your check your understanding. You need to do that. That's not there for kicks and giggles. That's there to help you prepare for assessments. And you have time to ask questions at the beginning of class. So please hear me very clearly. Do those check your understandings. I'm not going to check them for a grade because it needs to be a learning assignment. I will, in fact I will do this today, I will collect them just so I have a record of if you've been doing them or not. But it won't be for a grade. Because if we're not doing them, I need to know that so we can figure out how to get that done. All right, any final questions before we wrap up? What? Oh, I'm sorry, I totally forgot there was that one over there. How is this going to help us in the real world? Well, I got to point this out. First things first, you always have to recognize that not everything is something you can directly see in the real world. We're going to study linear, exponential, quadratic functions next unit, and those exist in the real world, but they're not necessarily going to help you with a job. However, if we learn them the right way, they're beautiful and they're interesting. At the same time, data is always around you. This part of our class is the most real world that you get. There are always articles that people are publishing. In fact, I saw an article just this weekend that I sent to a few friends of mine that was all about the fact that 6 out of 10, or the article alleges, 6 out of 10 high school and middle schoolers' grades are not actually reflective of their learning. That's a problem. So data's everywhere. And so we've got to figure out how to create studies to analyze that data, to collect that data. So like, if you want real world, this is as real as it gets. Okay? And that's what we're looking at, the real world all the time. Notice, it may not be 100% pertinent to your life, but everything has been very real world data so far. Right? Okay. Let's go grab a seat. Update your notes however you need to for a second. Caden, you still giving us your hero today? Oh yeah. Okay. So, update your notes. After we finish updating our notes, we are going to have Caden share his hero with you. I'm excited about this. Say again? Okay, hey, excuse me. I need y'all to stop talking for a second so you can pay attention to this. Remember, I'm still talking. So you have these Frere models. That's what these are called when there's a key concept in the center and there are 4 quadrants around it. Okay, it's called a Frere model. Pay attention to what section we're on so that you know where you can put some good notes. So, what have we been talking a whole lot about? Population, sample, and characteristic of interest. So if you have notes about those things, you would put your notes here. So use the center to tell you where to put your notes. and there's literally a whole section for those notes. Anything you need to update. We have started talking about types of studies. What are the two types of studies we've talked about? Observational and sample surveys. We're studying statistics, right? But notice, use those to guide what you're thinking about. Also, if you're ever like, Mr. Kinney, I don't know what to write, the proficiency scales tells you exactly what vocabulary and exactly what skills I need you to learn. So take advantage of those resources. And then let me know if you're still struggling. I'm going to be there to help you. But we need to update whatever we don't have. And again, this is why I would put my stuff in order. I would put my proficiency scale at the very front of the unit. Put those other things in. It depends. Are you making notes about categorical and quantitative data? Because there's a fair model for that. Are you making notes about population sample? Right. It depends on what you're writing notes about. Now, you can put notes wherever you want, but I would put them with the concept that it goes with. Yep. We're on that one, and then we started this one. But if you need to add anything, I would go on. We haven't talked about treatments yet. We have talked about all of those. We have done that one. Actually, I'll show it to you in a second. I'll at least show you which ones we have done, so you know to think about.
I'll probably go to
I can print one out for you, so don't let, I'll do that during lunch. So we'll take it.
I don't know.
Actually, I guess I can do it. There's still some people doing it.
No, I was I ain't fooling.
Okay. It sounds like conversation's dying down. It looks like we have our notes. If you need to still keep taking notes, go for it. Right now, Kaden, where'd you go? You ready for your Hero Friday? Yes? I mean, don't make it complicated, right? If you wanted to send me a picture, you could have, but if you just want to stand up, talk about whoever your hero is, we can go for that.
Yeah, so my hero is Mr. Kinney. He like changed the way I look at math every day, and like he asks us so many great questions. It makes us think so hard every day, and like it's just awesome.
Okay. All right. So at this point, we're going to pick up with textbook resources, look at types of study, and then we're going to look at This is America by Childish Gambino to learn about bias. Nope. I'm going to only give you 10 seconds of it. As a quick reminder, what is critical in order to learn well and to be successful? Think, communicate, and collaborate. That's what's critical for learning, right? So, to think, to communicate, to collaborate, to actively engage and collaborate with your peers. So, there's a score every single day for us. Those who engage more will learn more, and it will come out, especially if you study. All right, so this is page, I don't know, what page was this? 69, M5-69 in the textbook, I believe. I said 69 just now. 65 was the first page we tore out. Here you go, Maya. Yes, Chelsea. I can in a second. It's right there. All right. So we can see the definition on the board right there. What's an observational study? I was saying, I can barely hear you on that one, right? So what does it say there? It says an observational study. In an observational study, data are gathered, what? About a characteristic of the population by simply what? Observing. Oh my gosh. In an observational study, you're going to what?
Observe.
Observe.
Oh, you want to write down for the number?
No, not yet.
Okay.
But in observational study, you are simply what? Observing. That's it, okay? So, we already did the population, the sample, and the characteristic of interest yesterday, correct? Does that sound right? So we already did number one. And I think we went through the why. Hey, by the way, guys, don't forget, it's the why that's going to get you to the correct answer next time. So, do the rules vary by scenario? No, if we understand why. The population was all in-house daycare centers in one U.S. state. Why? Because that's the group I want to make an inference about. The sample was the 132 daycare centers in one state. Why? Because that's where the data came from. It was the smaller portion of the group. The characteristic of interest was the amount of time children spend watching television at daycares. Why? Because that's what the researchers want to know. So, don't forget that. But what I want to focus on in a second, because this is going to help address the question of what is an observational study. Let's look at the similarities and the differences for sample surveys. By the way, this is number 2 there. Sample surveys versus observational studies. This is answering which question, Addison? Which question is this answering? Huh? Okay, John, do you know which question? Okay, we gotta get it locked in. Yes, ma'am. Amber said it. It was question 2, similarities and differences. This is gonna help us understand sample surveys versus observational studies. So, anyone know a similarity between the two? Or a difference? Just start there. Say again. They're both what? Ah, they both ask a... Oh, there's something... I agree, they do ask a question, but I feel like there's something we got to add to that detail. Well, only one's an observational study. Why is there a blank there?
Whole lot.
Not necessarily. Good thoughts. Say again. Well, a survey question is going to go with a sample survey, but you're getting closer. Okay, a quantitative maybe, but could they also ask categorical questions? Or look for categorical data? But no matter what, we want all questions to be interesting. What type of questions are interesting? Say it again. Statistical questions. Guys, if I ask what color is the sky outside, that's not interesting. I can look out there and see it. But a statistical question, what is the most common sky color? And we'd have to look at different days. That's at least a little more interesting. Okay? Well, I was just pointing out we were missing a piece, a statistical question. They're both asking a statistical question. What else is similar or different? How about this? I didn't give y'all any time to really think about this. Take 60 seconds, talk with your group for just a minute, see if you can come up with some ideas, and then we'll have a whole class discussion about it. Come up with something? What difference? All right, let's bring it together. We may not have a perfect answer, but we're going to use each other's ideas to build and construct ideas. So I need us all engaged in this conversation. So, a similarity or a difference? Kalia, what you got? Both gather data. So both ask a statistical question, and do we gather data?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Okay. What y'all come up with, Jamie?
One of them like asked the person a question, then the other one actually the third one.
Which one's asking, so let me put this to y'all. Preston, which one's asking people a question?
The sample.
Yes,
Preston.
A sample survey, is that true? Do we agree sample surveys ask people questions? Okay. And so that means an observational study is just observing to collect data. So, sample survey. Ask people questions to gather the data. And we should say that, right? They ask people questions to gather the data, while observational studies observe or another common word is examine to gather data. Okay. It is important to recognize those two differences because that's going to help you recognize what type of study you're dealing with. And you're going to start to see these all over the place because studies are everywhere. Right, Jaquel?
Yeah.
You got these notes down?
Yeah.
How? You don't have the paper out. Jaquel, that's a terrible way to take notes to your future forgetful self. All right. Now, there is one last similarity that I am going to go ahead and hint at and almost give you because this is the most important detail for what we're about to go into. What's the goal of a sample survey? To make an inference about a population. Any guesses what the goal of an observational study is?
To observe.
Well, so, based on this data, right, about the daycare centers, we believe because they only looked at how many daycare centers? 132. You think there's more daycare centers than that in the entire state?
Yeah.
Yes, probably. So what are they trying to do with that sample? They're trying to do something.
Trying to gather.
For what purpose, though?
To study and see.
That's part of it.
Okay.
But hold on, what was the goal of the sample survey again?
Describe it.
To make an inference about what? Oh, about the population. What are we going to try to do with this data? We're going to try to make an inference about what? The population. Guys, sample surveys and observational studies have the same goals. You cannot forget these goals. Both try to use a sample to make an inference about the population. That's the goal. And that goal is foundational to what we are doing. Ready, that was cute. Did you get all your notes down before you try to touch on with the card? Yeah. Okay, just make sure. There's a handful of us still taking some quick notes, and then we will get started in a second. Jaquel, do you not have the pages from the book? You do? You just didn't want to write down the notes on them? I mean, this is directly from the book. Or, hey, by the way, guys, I should have mentioned this earlier. You can put this in the book, or, and I might transfer it over later to have something more concise to study. There is a Frere model, check your understanding, that is types of studies. Right, so these are the first two types of studies. Okay? So yeah, I might have that sheet out. Or what might be a good thing is to transfer your notes over to that one day. Maybe over the weekend. I know, pulling notes out during the weekend. Say again. I'm just going to take up
The first two?
yeah, I guess just the first page. But even then, how about this? So that I don't have to keep it, I'm just going to take it while y'all go to lunch, make a scan of it, and I can give it right back to you. Yeah. The one that says, I'm going to take the categorical and quantitative and the population sample and characteristic of interest. But I'm going to make a scan of it during lunch and then give it back to you after lunch. Just go ahead and put it in there. So, hey, by the way, make sure your name's on it, guys. Make sure your name's on it. Let me just write on it. So, categorical and quantitative data. And then the population, sample, and characteristic of interest. Those are the two that I need right now. And again, I'm going to give them back to you right after lunch. So stack y'all together, put them on the blue box, or blue boxes in the center, and I'll grab them as y'all head to lunch. On the blue boxes. Oh yeah, you're, yeah. All right. Yeah. Let's focus on the stats right now. Okay. Now, really quick last note before that lunch bell catches us. Not all, listen to me again on this, not all studies are trying to make an inference about a population. What type of study have you traditionally done in your science classes? We use a different word for that one. Say it again. Experiments, okay? So the last type of study is an experiment. That's not how you spell it, experiment? There we go. Okay, an experiment. Okay, and so here's the thing. There's usually two things that you talk about very heavily in a science class, especially within experiments. One of them starts, let's just see if you know it first. Anybody? So you do have an hypothesis about something.
And a conclusion.
And a conclusion. Okay, let's see if this acronym helps bring it out. Have y'all never seen that acronym before?
Yes, I've seen it, but I forgot what it means.
Okay, so your dependent or response, what? Dependent or response? Variable, okay? Remember that goes on your y-axis. And then this is a manipulated or, what's that I stand for? Independent variable goes on the x-axis. Now, be aware, in statistics we call that manipulated and explanatory variable. And so, what we're going to try to do, if you have independent, dependent, you have explanatory and response. We want to look at cause and effect. We'll come back from lunch and talk about that cause and effect more. Okay, so picking up with where we left off before lunch. An experiment's different than observational study. What is the goal of an experiment? Not about the population, about what? What inference though? Hey guys, I need conversations focused on up here. Tyler, hood off please. It's up on the board. What inference are we trying to make? There we go. So remember, an inference about the population, Vicari, is observational studies and sample surveys. And an experiment is about cause and effect, which is why with an experiment, we always need an explanatory or independent variable, and we're trying to see how this thing affects the dependent variable. Okay? So under types of studies, this might be a good note to make that an experiment is trying to establish cause and effect between the explanatory or independent variable and dependent or response variable. Sir? There's a sheet that I just passed back, one of the fair models, that says types of studies. The one I just passed back. Well, that's the filled out one. On the back. It's two-sided. Say it one more time. The dry mix. You write whatever you want to. Hey guys, I know that these are different than the notes you're used to, but listen. You write what notes you need to make for your future forgetful self. The only thing I don't recommend is not to write anything down. But if dry mix is going to help you remember response and explanatory, then write down dry mix to help you, right? Make sure you explain it. But I would definitely get down this goal. Yes, Amber. Did it check y'all's again? Because I'm pretty sure I passed all the ones back that I had. Or check through y'all's papers to see if I accidentally gave somebody an extra paper. Is it just that one for you? Just that one? I literally took it down to the coffee machine and I brought it back. So like, that's all I could have. Hey guys, check, can you check through that pile to see if there's any that are not yours? So guys, check through the piles that I put back on your desk, see if there's any that's not yours and might be Amber's.
Yeah, I don't know. You said your hair right, is it? Yeah. That is, okay.
Man, the car's trying to steal Amber's stuff. I'm just kidding.
No.
That's right. Is this yours too? Unless I just messed up and didn't see it. Alright. Experiment, what was I saying besides that? Oh yeah, your notes. They're your notes here. So, inference about cause and effect between independent, and what's another word for independent that I've used? Dependent's completely different. Another word for the independent variable. Something on board. Somewhere. Maybe with the independent.
Explanatory.
Explanatory. Your independent is also known as an explanatory. You want to know why? Because it is explaining the dependent or response. That's it. So, make sure you have that goal. Okay. There's a handful of us still taking some notes. I'm going to wait a second. But then we are going to look at, I believe it's page 70 or page 71 from the textbook. It's 70 or 71. It's one of those two. Okay. All right. So let's look here at this. An experiment gathers data on the effect of one or more treatments or experimental conditions on the characteristic of interest. So if it's the effect of a treatment on the characteristic of interest, what other term have we used over there that could be similar to treatments? It's how a treatment affects the characteristic of interest. Say again?
The E word.
The E word? So the treatment is going to explain the characteristic of interest or response. So a treatment will be explaining a response. And I'm not going to assess you on experimental units, but it's a good thing to note. I mean, I would identify it, but I'm not going to assess you on it. Just priority of time. But what I want us to do now is I want us to take 5 minutes so that we have time to then discuss. Researchers conducting an experiment to test the effectiveness of a new asthma medication collected data from a sample of 200 asthma patients. 100 of the patients received a placebo treatment along with an inhaler. The other 100 patients received the new medication along with an inhaler. And monthly blood and breathing tests were performed on all 200 patients. I want you to work with your groups to identify the population, sample, and characteristic of interest in the experiment and the treatments in the experiment. And then don't worry about number 5. So you're only doing which numbers?
3 and 4.
3 and 4. So let's analyze that study design, 5 minutes, answering 3 and 4. And go. Your vertical surfaces.
Mr. Kim, I think I ain't placing down.
Huh?
I'm tired, like.
But if you stand up, you move around a little bit, it'll get your blood flowing, and you might be less
See, I keep
tired.
about to knock this little thing over right here. Who's gonna bring that paper? Oh.